She vanished after school. No one saw her leave. No one saw where she went. For 14 years her family lived in torment. Birthdays became funeral marches. Her room remained a shrine to the lost, and every knock at the door felt like it could shatter their hearts all over again. Until one stormy night she came back, soaking wet, older, but still clutching the same silver locket her father gave her the day she disappeared. And when her mother opened the door, she whispered just 2 words. "It's me." But what she said next wasn't a reunion. It was a warning that would tear their world apart. But before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. The storm had been battering Denver for 3 days straight, the kind of vicious, relentless downpour that turned streets into rivers and made the air taste of electricity and fear. On the corner of Blake Street and 15th Avenue, streetlights flickered with dying gasps, casting eerie shadows that danced across the flooded pavement. In their sickly yellow glow, the rain looked like falling knives, each drop slicing through the darkness. Emma Walsh stood frozen at her kitchen window, her trembling hands wrapped around a cracked ceramic mug that had grown cold hours ago. The coffee inside had turned bitter and black, but she couldn't taste anything anymore. Outside, the wind howled through the skeletal branches of the old oak tree in their front yard, the same tree her daughter used to swing from when she was small. Each creak of its tortured limbs sent ice through Catherine's veins, as if the tree itself was screaming for what it had witnessed. She wasn't expecting anyone. It was nearly midnight, the kind of hour when decent people locked their doors and prayed for morning. Catherine's mind had been drowning, as it did every night, in the memory of that cursed Tuesday in October, 14 years ago, the day her daughter vanished into thin air. In her nightmares, that day was always bright and mocking. The sky had been cruel blue, the air thick with the scent of dying leaves and diesel fumes from school buses that would never bring her baby home. She remembered standing at this very counter, slicing apples for a pie she would never finish, when the phone's shrill cry shattered her world. The school secretary's voice had been carefully controlled, professionally concerned, asking if Emma had come home early. She hadn't. By sunset, terror had carved itself into Catherine's bones, making its permanent home there. Now, blinking back to this nightmare present, she noticed the house. It had become a tomb. The television in the living room flickered like a dying campfire, casting ghostly images of a late-night news anchor whose words meant nothing in this hollow world. She'd muted it hours ago, unable to bear another voice when the only one she wanted to hear had been silent for 14 years. Then came the knock. 3 sharp, deliberate raps against the front door that made Catherine's heart explode in her chest. No one came calling at this hour, no one decent anyway. She set the mug down with shaking hands, nearly dropping it as ceramic clinked against the windowsill. For a terrifying moment she considered ignoring it, pretending she was already dead, like her heart had been for 14 years. But something about those knocks made her skin crawl with recognition. They weren't desperate, they weren't hesitant, they were familiar. Her bare feet made no sound against the cold hardwood as she crept toward the door like a woman walking to her execution. The house seemed to hold its breath with her, waiting for whatever fresh hell was about to unfold. She stopped just short of the door, staring at the frosted glass panel that revealed only a dark silhouette standing motionless on her porch. Her mind raced through impossible possibilities. A neighbor, a stranger, maybe death itself finally coming to collect what it had been owed for 14 years. But there was something in that shadow's posture, something in its terrible stillness, that made her blood turn to ice water. She turned the deadbolt with agonizing slowness. The metallic click echoed like a gunshot in the suffocating quiet. Then she slipped the chain free and pulled the door open just enough for the dying porch light to fall across the figure waiting in the storm. At first, her mind refused to process what she was seeing. A young woman stood there in the driving rain, water streaming from the hood of her jacket like tears from heaven itself. Her face was pale and sharp under the sickly light, but her eyes, dear God, her eyes were the same emerald green that had haunted Catherine's dreams for 14 years. In her right hand, she clutched something small and silver, its surface catching the light like a desperate signal from the dead. It was the locket, the one with the tiny engraved roses that Robert had given her for her 13th birthday. Catherine's breath died in her throat. "Mom?" the woman said, her voice rough and broken, as if the word had been buried alive and only now clawed its way back to the surface. Catherine could only stare as 14 years of agony collapsed into this single impossible moment. The woman's hair was longer, darker, her frame taller and sharper, but there was no mistaking the curve of her jaw, the way her left eyebrow arched. He'd slightly higher than the right, the small scar above her lip from falling off her bike when she was 7. "Emma," Catherine whispered, the name feeling foreign and sacred on her lips. Emma gave the slightest nod, her fingers tightening around the locket until her knuckles went white. Catherine's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the doorframe to keep from collapsing as 1,000 questions exploded in her mind like shrapnel. Where had she been? How had she survived? Who had taken her? Why was she back now? But before Catherine could form a single word, Emma's gaze shifted past her into the dark hallway of their home. Her expression changed, transforming into something that looked like pure terror. She took a quick step back, glancing over her shoulder into the storm-soaked street, as if checking for predators in the shadows. "We can't talk here," she said, her voice barely audible over the hammering rain. "It's not safe." Those words hit Catherine like a physical blow, colder than any storm wind. Before she could respond, headlights swept across their street like searchlights hunting for escaped prisoners. The beams briefly illuminated their front yard before a dark sedan rolled past. Too slow, too deliberate. Emma went rigid, her grip on the locket tightening until Catherine thought it might shatter. The vehicle slowed even more, then finally disappeared into the night. But its presence left behind a residue of menace that made the air itself feel poisonous. Catherine felt the crushing weight of 14 years of questions pressing down on her chest. Yet in that moment, she knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever had stolen her daughter was still out there, still hunting, still hungry. "Then tell me where," she whispered, her voice barely human. Emma's eyes locked onto hers, rain streaming down her face like the tears Catherine had cried every night for 14 years. In the dying porch light, Catherine thought she saw something even more terrifying than fear in her daughter's eyes. She saw knowledge, the kind that destroyed people. "Tomorrow," Emma said, her voice as cold as grave earth. "Same time, but not here. Never here again." And just like that, she turned and walked down the steps, her boots splashing through puddles that reflected the streetlights like pools of blood. Catherine watched her daughter disappear into the mist, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the seas. Torm's fury. Catherine stood in that doorway long after Emma had vanished. The locket's image burned into her retinas, the echo of that broken voice still cutting through her soul. For the first time in 14 years she had hope. And for the first time in just as long, she was absolutely terrified. When Emma Walsh was 13, she had been the kind of girl who collected secrets like other children collected coins. She wasn't shy exactly, but she had a way of watching people that made adults uncomfortable, as if she could see the lies they told themselves. Teachers remembered her for her unsettling intelligence. Classmates remembered her for the journal she carried everywhere, filled with observations about people that cut too close to the bone. Before the day she vanished, Emma's world had been small but fiercely protected. The modest Walsh home on Colfax Avenue, the walk to school along cracked sidewalks lined with chain-link fences, the corner pharmacy where she'd buy chocolate after violin practice. Catherine, her mother, worked crushing double shifts at Denver General Hospital. She'd come home exhausted, her scrubs reeking of disinfectant and despair, but she always made time to check Emma's homework, and listened to her daughter's sharp observations about teachers, classmates, and the world's infinite cruelties. She was Emma's lighthouse, steady and unbreakable, someone Emma believed would never abandon her. Robert, her father, was carved from different stone. A construction foreman by trade, his hands were always stained with concrete dust, his fingernails permanently darkened from years of building other people's dreams. He wasn't as talkative as Catherine, but his fierce love for Emma showed in smaller ways. A proud nod when she aced a test, a gentle hand on her shoulder when nightmares woke her, and most importantly, the day he gave her the small silver locket with roses engraved on its surface. "You'll always know you're loved," Robert had said that morning, fastening it around her neck with calloused but gentle fingers. That locket would become the last thing Emma remembered clutching before the world went black and her life became someone else's property. Years after her disappearance would compress into fragments for Emma. 14 years crushed into scattered pieces of memory that never quite formed a complete picture. She remembered a suffocating drive through mountains, the sound of gravel crunching under tires like broken bones. She remembered waking up in a bedroom with lavender walls and windows that looked out onto a yard she didn't recognize, in a place that smelled wrong. Too clean, too empty of love. There had been a woman there, kind in the way that predators learn to mimic kindness. She called herself Sarah and claimed to be a family friend. But no matter how many times Emma begged to call her parents, Sarah's response was always the same. "They can't be reached right now, sweetheart." For years, Emma had tried to piece together the truth, but every time she got close to answers, Sarah would deflect, or someone else in the house would intervene. She'd been enrolled in school under a different name, forced to live in a different state, and slowly the memories of Denver began to blur like watercolors in rain, except for the oak tree, the kitchen window, and the locket she kept hidden beneath her pillow. Now, standing in her old neighborhood, Emma felt like she was haunting her own grave. The houses were the same but older, their paint peeling like diseased skin, lawns overgrown like the beards of dead men. The corner pharmacy had closed, replaced by a check-cashing place with barred windows that looked like a prison. Catherine had aged in ways that made Emma's heart break. Deeper lines carved around her eyes like scars, more silver threading through her hair like premature frost. But her voice, the way she said Emma's name, was exactly as Emma remembered, and that made it harder somehow, because the part of her that had learned to survive by trusting no one was now at war with the part that wanted to tell her mother everything. Emma's return hadn't been planned. The opportunity had appeared suddenly, like a crack in a prison wall, a moment when she realized her watchers had grown careless, when the road back to Denver was finally clear. But now that she was here, she wasn't sure if she'd brought her hunters with her. She thought about that sedan that had crept past the house, the way its headlights had lingered like the eyes of a stalking predator. She had spent years learning to read danger in shadows, to smell threats on the wind. That instinct had kept her breathing when others might have given up, and now it was screaming that the past wasn't finished with her. Not even close. Catherine spent the next day moving through her hospital shifts like a sleepwalker, her mind trapped in an endless loop of Emma's face, the sound of her voice saying, "Mom," as if the word itself was a wound that had never healed. She wanted to believe her daughter was safe now, that the nightmare was finally over. But Emma's warning, "It's not safe," echoed in her mind like a funeral bell that wouldn't stop ringing. When she finally came home that evening, she went straight to the attic, pulling down a dust-covered box marked Emma in her own handwriting from years ago. Inside were relics of a stolen life, school notebooks filled with her daughter's sharp handwriting, violin recital programs, a faded denim jacket, and photographs from birthdays and Christmases that now felt like evidence from a crime scene. She held each item as if it might bridge the 14-year chasm between then and now, as if it could explain how her little girl had become this haunted young woman who appeared out of storms like a ghost seeking vengeance. At the bottom of the box, her fingers found something that made her blood turn to ice, a folded piece of paper she'd never seen before. She opened it with trembling hands. It was a hand-drawn map, rough but detailed, showing several streets with an X marked near the South Platte River. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't remember Emma ever drawing this, couldn't imagine how it had gotten into the box. Had Emma drawn it before she vanished, somehow sensing danger? Or had someone else put it there after, like a breadcrumb leading to truth, or to a trap? That night, Emma finally called from a number that didn't exist in any phone book. "Where were you today?" Her voice was tense, almost accusatory. Catherine hesitated. "Working. Emma, I found something. Don't say anything else over the phone." Emma cut her off sharply. "They could be listening. We need to meet, but somewhere public, somewhere safe." "Who is they, Emma? Please, you have to tell me. People who should have forgotten about me by now. People who won't stop until they get what they want." Before Catherine could ask what they wanted, the line went dead, leaving her alone with questions that felt like knives in her chest. Later that night, Catherine was jolted awake by a sound that didn't belong, not the house settling, not the wind. This was different, deliberate. It was the sound of someone testing the lock on her back door. Catherine lay perfectly still, every muscle coiled like a spring, her eyes fixed on the dark outline of her bedroom door. The soft clicking of the lock being manipulated was followed by the creak of wood, then silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Then came the thin beam of a flashlight, sliding across the wall outside her bedroom like a searching finger of light. She reached into her nightstand drawer, her hand closing around the handle of the knife Robert had kept there, the one he'd bought after a rash of break-ins years ago, the one that had never been used for anything more dangerous than opening packages. She held her breath and waited, listening to the sound of careful footsteps on the stairs, moving with the precision of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The footsteps paused outside her bedroom door. Catherine's heart was beating so loudly, she was certain whoever was out there could hear it. Seconds stretched into eternities. Then the footsteps retreated, moving back downstairs with the same careful precision. She heard the soft click of the back door closing, then nothing but the sound of rain against her windows. When Catherine finally crept to her bedroom window, she saw a figure in a dark hooded jacket climbing into a waiting SUV. The vehicle pulled away without turning on its headlights, disappearing into the night like a nightmare that was only pretending to be over. By morning, she had made her decision. This wasn't something she could face alone. She needed help, and she knew exactly who to call. Detective Maria Santos had been the lead investigator on Emma's case 14 years ago. She was the only one who had never truly given up, the only one who still returned Catherine's calls every year on the anniversary of Emma's disappearance. When Catherine walked into the cramped detective's office that morning, Maria's weathered face immediately shifted from surprise to deep concern. "Catherine, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Catherine sat down across from her and told her everything. The knock at the door, Emma's warning, the map, the break-in. She left out only one crucial detail: where Emma was now. She couldn't risk it, not yet. Maria listened in silence, her fingers drumming against a thick file folder that Catherine recognized with a stab of pain, Emma's case file, still active after all these years. When Catherine finished, Maria leaned back in her chair. "If Emma's really back, and if what you're telling me is true, then whoever took her is still out there. And they're not done." Catherine's voice came out as a whisper. "Maria, I think it might be someone we know. Someone who's been close to us all along." The detective's eyes narrowed. "That would explain why we never found any trace of her, why every lead went cold. What do we do?" Maria opened Emma's file, revealing 14 years' worth of dead ends and false hopes. "We finish what we started, and this time we don't let them disappear into the shadows." That afternoon, Emma called from yet another untraceable number. Her voice was strained, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. "We need to meet, somewhere crowded but not obvious. The food court at Cherry Creek Mall tonight at 8. Catherine almost laughed at the mundane location. After 14 years of absence, they would reunite over mall pizza and teenager gossip. But she heard the carefully calculated reasoning behind Emma's choice. Public enough to discourage violence, crowded enough to blend in, large enough to escape if things went wrong. The food court was buzzing with the usual evening crowd when Catherine arrived. She spotted Emma immediately, sitting alone at a corner table, her back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Even from a distance, Catherine could see the tension in her daughter's shoulders, the way her hand never strayed far from her jacket pocket. As Catherine approached, she noticed new details that broke her heart. The thin scar running along Emma's hairline, the way her eyes darted to every exit, the careful way she held herself, as if she expected attack from any direction. "You came," Emma said, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise. "You're my daughter," Catherine replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "Of course I came." Emma's eyes continued their restless patrol of the crowd. "You weren't followed. I checked." "Emma, who are you afraid of?" Before Emma could answer, a man in a business suit walked past their table, slowing just slightly as he passed. Emma's entire body went rigid, her hand moving to whatever was in her pocket. The man continued walking, disappearing into the crowd, but the damage was done. Emma was already standing. "We can't stay here," she whispered urgently. "It's not safe." They moved through the mall quickly, Emma leading with the confidence of someone who had planned multiple escape routes. They ended up in Catherine's car in the far corner of the parking garage, the concrete structure feeling like a bunker around them. "Now will you tell me what's happening?" Catherine pleaded. Emma stared out the windshield for a long moment before speaking. "The people who took me, they didn't just want me gone. They wanted something from Dad. And I don't think they ever got it." Catherine's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean? Your father never—" "Mum," Emma interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Dad wasn't who you thought he was. He was involved with people who hurt others for money. And when he tried to get out, they took me as insurance." The words hit Catherine like physical blows. Robert, her Robert, involved with criminals? It was impossible. But looking at Emma's haunted eyes, she realized her daughter had paid the price for whatever sins her father had committed. What did they want from him? Emma reached into her jacket and pulled out a small key. Brass, old-fashioned, with numbers etched into its surface. He hid something valuable enough to steal a child's life for. And they think you might know where it is. Catherine stared at the key, her mind reeling. "I don't know anything about any key, Emma. Your father never—" She stopped. A memory was surfacing, something she'd forgotten or deliberately buried. Robert, in his workshop, always tinkering with that old filing cabinet in the corner. The one he'd always said contained just work stuff whenever she'd asked. The one that had been locked since the day he died. Emma saw the recognition in her mother's eyes. "You remember something?" "There's a filing cabinet in your father's workshop. He always kept it locked, said it was just old job records. But maybe—" "We need to look," Emma said. "Tonight, before they realize I'm not running anymore." As they drove home, Catherine caught glimpses of a dark SUV in her rearview mirror, always staying just far enough back to seem like coincidence. But by the time they pulled into their driveway, it had vanished into the maze of Denver's streets. The workshop was exactly as Robert had left it when he died 5 years earlier. Tools hanging in neat rows, workbench cleared except for a thin layer of dust, and in the corner, the old filing cabinet that had guarded its secrets for nearly 2 decades. The key Emma had been carrying fit perfectly. Inside, beneath layers of legitimate work documents, they found a manila envelope sealed with yellowed tape. Catherine's hands shook as she peeled it open. The contents made her knees go weak. Photocopies of property deeds, bank records showing large cash deposits, and most damning of all, a photograph of Robert standing next to a man Catherine didn't recognize, both of them smiling in front of a warehouse she'd never seen. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Denver River District, 1995. Emma stared at the photograph with recognition, and something that looked like fear. That's him. That's Marcus, the man who arranged my disappearance.
Your father knew him? More than knew him, Mum. Dad was his partner, and when Dad tried to quit, Marcus took me to make sure he stayed quiet." Catherine sank into Robert's old chair, the weight of 14 years of lies crushing down on her. Her husband hadn't just been innocent. He'd been complicit in their daughter's kidnapping. "There's more," Emma said quietly, pulling another document from the envelope. It was a hand-drawn map of a warehouse complex with measurements and what looked like structural notes. "I think this is what Marcus really wanted. Not just Dad's silence, but whatever Dad was hiding." As Emma spoke, a shadow moved past the workshop window. Both women froze, listening to the sound of footsteps on gravel outside. Then came 3 sharp knocks on the workshop door, the same deliberate rhythm Catherine had heard the night Emma returned. But Emma hadn't knocked. Someone else was here. Someone who knew they would be in the workshop tonight. Someone who had been waiting for this moment for 14 years. The knocking stopped, replaced by a silence so absolute it felt like death holding its breath. Catherine and Emma stared at each other across the workshop, both frozen in the amber of absolute terror. Then came the sound of the door handle turning, slowly, deliberately, like someone savoring the moment before reveal. Emma moved first, grabbing her mother's hand and pulling her behind the workbench as the door swung open with a creak that sounded like the gates of hell. A figure stepped into the doorway, backlit by the streetlight outside, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow half the room. "I know you're in here, Emma," said a voice that was warm and familiar, and absolutely wrong in this context. "And Catherine, there's no point hiding. We need to talk." Catherine's breath died in her throat as the figure stepped fully into the workshop, allowing the overhead light to reveal his face. Detective Maria Santos. But it wasn't the Maria that Catherine had known for 14 years. This Maria held a gun with the casual confidence of someone who had pointed it at people before. This Maria smiled with the cold satisfaction of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. "You look surprised, Catherine," Maria said, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. "You shouldn't be. Who did you think was feeding information to Marcus all these years? Who do you think made sure every investigation hit a dead end?" Emma rose slowly from behind the workbench, her face pale but her voice steady. "You're the one who told them I was coming back? Smart girl. I always said you were too observant for your own good." Maria's gun never wavered. "When Catherine came to see me yesterday, I knew our little game was finally reaching its endgame." Catherine felt the world tilting around her. "Maria, you were my friend. You helped search for Emma. You comforted me, what?" "Then I did my job," Maria cut her off sharply. "I kept you hopeful enough to keep quiet, and desperate enough not to ask the right questions. Do you have any idea how hard it was, pretending to care about your snivelling for 14 years? The cruelty in her voice was like a slap. This was the woman Catherine had trusted with her deepest fears, her most desperate hopes. This was the woman who had held her while she cried on the anniversary of Emma's disappearance. "What do you want?" Emma demanded. Maria's smile widened. "What we've always wanted. What your father stole from us before he died like the coward he was, leaving us to clean up his mess." She gestured with the gun toward the envelope still lying open on the workbench. "Those documents are just the beginning. Your father didn't just hide evidence, he hid something much more valuable. A safety deposit box key, Emma, one that opens a box containing enough evidence to destroy some very important people." "I don't know anything about a safety deposit box," Emma said. Maybe not consciously,
But Marcus always suspected Robert told you something before he died. A clue, a hint, maybe even the key itself hidden somewhere you'd remember. Catherine's mind raced back through her memories of Robert's final days. He'd been sick for months, delirious from the medication, saying strange things that she'd dismissed as fever dreams. But now... He kept talking about the oak tree, Catherine whispered. In his final weeks he was obsessed with the oak tree in our front yard. He kept saying Emma would know what he meant. Emma's eyes widened. The tree house. He built me a tree house when I was 10. I used to hide treasures up there, special rocks, diary keys, anything I wanted to keep safe. Maria's gun swung toward the door. Then let's take a walk, shall we? And remember, any attempt to run or signal for help, and your reunion will be much shorter than you'd hoped. They walked through the rain-soaked night toward the oak tree, Maria staying several steps behind them, her weapon trained on Catherine's back. The tree loomed against the stormy sky like a gallows, its branches creaking ominously in the wind. "Up you go, Emma," Maria commanded. "And don't even think about trying to disappear into those branches. I've been shooting things out of trees since I was 12. Emma looked up at the treehouse. Really just a platform with walls, weathered by 14 years of Denver winters. She began to climb, her movements careful and deliberate. "There's a loose board on the south side," she called down. "Dad showed me how to hide things underneath it." The sound of wood creaking carried down through the storm as Emma pried up the board. Then she went very still. "It's here," she said, her voice strange and distant. "But it's not just a key." She climbed down with something wrapped in oilcloth, her face pale in the streetlight. When she unwrapped it, they saw not just a safety deposit box key, but a small digital recorder and a handwritten note. Maria snatched the items from Emma's hands, her eyes gleaming with triumph as she read the note by the light of her phone. Then her expression changed. "What does it say?" Catherine demanded. Maria's voice was flat and cold. "It says, the safety deposit box contains evidence that will destroy not just Marcus but everyone who worked with him, including detailed records of every crime, every cover-up, every person who died to keep their secrets safe." She looked up at them, and for the first time since entering the workshop, there was fear in her eyes. "It also says that if anything happens to Emma or Catherine, copies of everything will be automatically sent to every major newspaper and federal agency in the country." Emma smiled for the first time since returning home. "Dad might have made mistakes, but he was never stupid. He knew someone close to you was feeding information to Marcus, so he set up a dead man's switch." Maria raised her gun again, but her hand was shaking now. "You're lying. Robert was dying. He couldn't have—" "My father spent his last months planning," Emma said calmly. "He arranged for someone to watch over the evidence, someone Marcus could never touch, someone who's been waiting 14 years for me to come home and claim what's mine." As if summoned by her words, headlights suddenly blazed from the street, temporarily blinding all three women. Multiple car doors slammed, and authoritative voices cut through the storm. "Police! Drop your weapon!" But these weren't Denver police. Emma could see the FBI logos on their jackets as they approached with weapons drawn. Maria's gun clattered to the ground as the reality of her situation sank in. She'd been outmaneuvered by a dead man and a 13-year-old girl who had grown up learning to think 3 steps ahead of her captors. As the federal agents led Maria away in handcuffs, she turned back one last time. "This isn't over," she snarled. "Marcus won't stop. There are others." "Marcus was arrested 3 hours ago," one of the FBI agents informed her. "Along with the rest of his organization. Your father's evidence was very thorough, Miss Walsh." Emma watched the police cars disappear into the storm, then turned to her mother, who was staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "How long have you been planning this?" Catherine asked. "Since the day I escaped," Emma replied. "I've been building a case against them for 2 years, working with federal investigators, but I needed to come home to get Dad's evidence. I needed you to help me find it.
And if Maria hadn't shown her true colours? Then we would have found another way to expose her, but Dad always said the guilty ones reveal themselves when they think they've won. Catherine pulled her daughter into the first real embrace they'd shared in 14 years, both of them crying in the rain under the oak tree that had kept Robert's final secret safe. "Is it really over?" Catherine whispered. Emma held her tighter. "It's over, Mum. We can finally go home." 3 months later, the morning sun broke through Denver's clouds for what felt like the first time in years, casting golden light through the kitchen window, where Catherine stood making coffee. Real coffee this time, not the bitter brew of insomnia and despair. Emma sat at the kitchen table, sketching in a new journal. Not observations about people's dark secrets this time, but plans for the future. College applications, apartment listings, all the normal concerns of a young woman trying to build a life that had been stolen from her. The trials had been swift and decisive. Maria Santos was facing federal charges that would keep her in prison for the rest of her life. Marcus and his organization had been dismantled, their network of corruption exposed by Robert's methodical documentation of their crimes. The media had called it the biggest police corruption scandal in Denver's history, but to Catherine and Emma, it was simply the end of a nightmare that had lasted 14 years. "I've been thinking about Dad," Emma said, not looking up from her sketching. Catherine tensed slightly. Robert's legacy remained complicated. A man who had tried to do the right thing in the end, but only after making choices that had cost their family everything. What about him? I think he knew he was going to die before he could make things right. So he did the only thing he could. He made sure we'd be able to finish what he started. Catherine joined her daughter at the table, noting how much older Emma looked in the morning light. She was 27 now, but carried herself with the wisdom of someone who had survived experiences that would have broken most people. "Do you think you can forgive him?" Catherine asked. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her pencil tracing absent patterns on the paper. "I think forgiveness isn't about what he deserved. It's about what I need to move forward." Outside, the oak tree swayed in a gentle breeze, its leaves rustling with sounds that no longer seemed ominous. The treehouse platform was still there, weathered but intact, a monument to secrets kept and promises finally fulfilled. Emma's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled, the first completely unguarded smile Catherine had seen from her since her return. "College acceptance letter?" Catherine asked hopefully. "Better," Emma replied, showing her the screen. It was from a victims advocacy group in Seattle, offering her a job helping other families navigate the aftermath of long-term abductions. "You're going to help other families," Catherine said, understanding immediately. Emma nodded. "I want to use what happened to me, turn it into something that can help others find their way home." Catherine reached across the table and took her daughter's hand, a gesture that would have made Emma flinch just months ago, but now felt natural, healing. "Your father would be proud," she said softly. "Maybe. But more importantly, I'm proud of us. We survived. We found each other. We won." Later that afternoon, Emma walked alone to the park by the South Platte River, the same area where the warehouse had stood before federal investigators had torn it down as part of their investigation. Now it was just empty land, waiting for something better to grow there. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. "Sarah?" she said when the woman answered. "It's Emma. Emma Walsh." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I wanted you to know," Emma continued, "that I understand now why you did what you did. You were protecting me the only way you knew how, keeping me alive when others wanted me silenced. I know it wasn't easy, pretending to be something you weren't." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you, sweetheart. But they would have killed you if I hadn't—" "I know," Emma interrupted gently. "And I want you to know that when I testify at your hearing next month, I'm going to tell them that. You saved my life.
even if you couldn't give me my freedom." They talked for another 20 minutes, two women trying to make sense of an impossible situation, trying to find forgiveness in the wreckage of 14 stolen years. When Emma finally hung up, she felt something she hadn't experienced since she was 13. Peace. That evening, as the sun set over Denver, Catherine found Emma standing in the front yard, looking up at the oak tree. "Regrets?" Catherine asked. "No," Emma replied, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the silver locket she still wore. "I was thinking about all the birthdays we missed, all the conversations we never had, all the normal mother-daughter moments that were stolen from us." Catherine's heart clenched, preparing for the pain of loss all over again. But Emma smiled. "And I was thinking that we have the rest of our lives to make new ones." As they stood together in the fading light, a gentle breeze moved through the oak tree's branches. But this time, instead of sounding like a lament for the lost, it sounded like a whisper of welcome. The nightmare was over. The healing could finally begin. And for the first time in 14 years, both women knew they were exactly where they belonged. Home. The storm may have passed, but in this city, shadows have long memories, and some secrets don't stay buried for long. If you think this story's over, you haven't been paying attention. Keep watching the Witness Archives, because the truth is never the whole story.